In our last episode, we talked about the reasons that Social Security is running out of money. Today, we're going to explore the solutions to funding Social Security.
Last episode was kind of a downer, Austin. We talked about all of the things wrong with Social Security, about the trajectory of income being less than expense, and the fact that there's going to have to be some changes. But today, we get to talk solutions because it's not all dire. There are actually ways that the government could act and make things more sustainable in our trajectory. So where do we go with this?
Well, we have to realize, one, it's not dire for beneficiaries, because we really think that the government will do something. The problem is, it's maybe a little bit more dire for you and I.
Oh, no.
Because we get to now be the bearers of funding Social Security into the future. And so, where it's dire on one end, it becomes dire on the other. It's fine. But the reality is there's lots of levers that can be pulled. So we're going to talk through a few of those. First is the do nothing lever.
So clients and viewers out there, who most of you are older than us, you're welcome. We're going to be paying into that trust fund going forward and do our best along with all of the younger folks in making sure that it's there for you as you get into retirement.
And ideally, it's there for us in the future as well.
Hopefully.
But again, the do nothing lever, this has been the favorite of Social Security since 1935. And the reality is, if Congress does nothing, if benefits are not cut, then if there is no payroll tax increased, if the wage base isn't changed, if nothing happens, in 2033, 2034, benefits are going to be cut by roughly 23% across the board. Social Security does not go away. There is still the FICA tax that is leveraged on all wages up to that wage base. So there's still going to be money coming in, just not enough to cover what's going out. And so when that happens, if nothing is done, benefits are cut across the board. We don't want to see that happen. So let's explore a couple of the ways that we can find solutions. And all of these solutions are found from the Social Security actuarial projections. You can go to their website and see if this lever is pulled, what happens. But there's actually a better tool because Social Security's website, it just comes in a table format. And so you can't get to see real-time feedback. You have to do your own math.
On a scale of 1 to wonky, it is super wonky.
It is. It's a great way to put it. But we're going to be using a tool called the Reformer. We'll link a link to that in the description below if you want to try to fix Social Security yourself. It's kind of fun if you're a nerd. I like it. I think it's fun. So when we talk about the percent of gap closed, so that's a phrase that the tool uses. What it does is it looks 75 years into the future, because that's where Social Security's projections go. It says in the 75th year from now, what will this do? Is the trust fund still going to be a viable option? And so the reality is, what we need to do is in the immediate, we need to spike funds up. And then the idea would be, let's level it out so that income and expenses offset each other for a long time going forward. So we don't want funds to do what they did in the late 80s to early 2000s and have a surplus, because then all the rest of the government's going to just take the money from Social Security. So you don't want to overfund the trust fund. You want it to get as close to expenses as possible without going back in the red. Because again, if we look at the original law of Social Security, it says whatever comes in has to pay what's going out, minus the interest that's paid. And so that law isn't going to be changed. So we just need to make sure we have money coming in that offsets what money is going out. So solution number one, do nothing. We don't think that's the right solution because people get hurt. Now, solution two, it's the single solution. There is actually one lever that if you pull it, it funds Social Security. Now, if you recall, you've got a wage base. The current wage base is $168,600 in 2024. All wages are taxed 12.4% up to that point, split between employer and employee. There's also the Medicare tax, but we're not going to cover Medicare for today. So if you simply increase that payroll tax, I say simply, this is going to be painful, but if you simply increase it from 12.4% to 16%, an increase of 3.6%, the trust fund is solvent for 75 years. It would have been less than that if this payroll increase had been done earlier, but it hasn't been done. And so every year we defer it, it gets a little bit more expensive.
So if we did it maybe when the Simpson-Bowles Commission came out 12, 13 years ago, maybe it just needed to be like 2.5% or something like that. But here we are, 3.6% lever. Not fun, but it's a solution.
It is a solution. And then in that 75th year, then there's going to be a revenue shortfall, and then something else needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm going to be well over 100 by then, so that can be done by my grandkids.
Prayerfully, I'm in the grave at that point.
Yes,
Let's be honest.
Amen.
But we don't want to be short-sighted like that. Let's really think about how this actually affects somebody. So we'll run a quick example. So Adam is a W-2 employee, which means his employer covers half, he covers half. Okay. Let's imagine that he has a gross salary of $100,000. Means he has to pay 6.2% into Social Security every year. So that means Adam currently pays about $6,200 of his gross salary goes to funding Social Security. If that payroll tax is increased from 12.4 to 16%, then he is now responsible for 8% or $8,000. So his salary is reduced by $1,800 annually, $150 a month. It is substantial. It's $150 that Adam now does not have. But if we look at it over the entirety of his salary, hopefully he can make that adjustment. But that's going to be across the board up until that wage base. So the employer also is going to have to pay another $6,200 annually, or the employer has $6,200 annually, so they have to pay another $1,800 annually to get that $8,000. But that's the one lever. If Congress wanted to do one thing, that's all they need to do.
So we think about this on multiple levels because we've got the employee level that it's going to be 1.8%. We've got the employer level. So the practical element here is, you've got something like a little bit less than 2% less income that's disposable, let's just say, and an employer is not making as much, so corporate profitability drops. The stock market probably drops some if this gets pushed through. But at least our books are solvent. At least we have some level of stability.
Yeah, exactly. And so if the situation were to change and we say, okay, we don't want to just fund it for 75 years. We want to fund it indefinitely into the future. Again, based on current fertility rates, worker rates, all longevity, all that stuff. Based on 2023's trustee report. If you want to fund it indefinitely, the payroll tax just needs to be increased by 4.4%. And so we go from 12.4 to 16.8. Again, like you were saying, there's a cut to profitability, there's a cut to disposable income, but at the end of the day, Social Security is solvent. And that's all we're trying to do in this situation. We're just trying to make sure that there's enough Social Security money coming in.
And there's knock-on effects here that we're not going to minimize, in that if you have less income for workers, you have also less profitability for companies. Both of those are going to tend towards increasing the likelihood of a short-term recession. There's going to be pain to adjust these pieces. It's just, where do we want to take the pain to make sure that longer term we don't have significant issues?
And short term, you could increase it 1% this year. All that does is push it off from 2033 or 2034 to 2038. And so again, you can deal with it, or you can kick the can down the road, but at some point something needs to be done. Okay, so we've done the single lever. That's really the only single lever that can be done to solve the situation. Now, what if you don't want to just do that? There's multi-pronged solutions. And so we're going to look at some of these multi-pronged solutions. So some of them are going to be, again, increasing that payroll tax. One would be, remember, that payroll tax is only up to $168,600. What happens if you remove that? What happens if you don't remove it at 168, but you give a gap between 168 and 400,000, and then cap it on all earnings above 400,000? And so again, we're going to talk about all those different levers that we can pull. So first one, if you subject all wages to 12.4%, again, you don't increase it. You just say, well, now all wages are subject to that tax. Really what that does is it reduces corporate profitability because they got to pay on more wages, but it's going to affect the higher income earners more than it does lower income earners. That would reduce the spending gap by 59%. So if you just eliminated that, takes it away by 59%. If you only wanted to tax the wealthiest of earners, and then give them a fourth bend point. If you need a reminder of bend points, you can go back and watch a previous video that we did. But if they added a fourth bend point that pays out 2% of all wages on top of that fourth bend point, and you tax all wages above 400,000, reduces the gap by 66%. And so you're saying you can still have some benefit on those wages. If you remember, it's tiered down. The more income that you put in at those top levels doesn't give you as much benefit as the first dollars in.
So we've got a situation right now where we're saying, okay, if we remove the cap at 168.6, and now people that make 250, they make 300, they make 400, they make $2 million.
Yeah.
All of those are subjected to 12.4%.
Yeah.
But they get some benefit there because that third bend point is 15%, I believe. Yeah. So they're getting a higher level of Social Security. But if in this other scenario, we're basically saying we're going to create this fourth bend point for just wages over $400,000. We don't have $168,600 to $400,000. We don't have that 12.4% there. It's only on $400,000 and up, and we're going to give less with Social Security. So it's not necessarily that the benefit is less than it would be right now, but they're going to pay more for it, and they're going to get a very marginal benefit. But what we're hearing is that solves 66% of that gap, which is higher than the 59% if we just removed the cap entirely. So I think one of the learning points here is if we remove the cap entirely and we just have that 12.4% applied across all wages, there's still a significant amount of outlay in the benefits that we have to pay out based on those higher levels of income there. So if we do some interesting math here, then what we have is actually a way to increase taxes on the wealthiest and give them less benefit for that, but kind of solve our Social Security issue at a higher level.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a clarification point here on that. If you just eliminate the wage gap, then there's not a fourth bend point that's added that reduces. And so it's just all wages are included. And so, again, there's a whole lot more complexity here when you actually dive into the nuance of how it's done. But again, there's ways to fix it. So the next one is changing the full retirement age. So if you were born after 1959, so 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. If the full retirement age is raised from 67 to 68, just add a year, then it decreases that funding gap by 13%. So you kind of start to see, okay, we've got several levers that you can pull. If you increase the age, if you increase the full retirement age, if you increase the benefit wage base, if you increase the FICA tax, you do a couple of these, then you can really eliminate some of that pain. The 50s was when they increased it from 65 to 66 to 67, or when they increased it from 66 to 67. What they did was over a period of 6 years, they added 2 months a year. And so it wouldn't just be overnight, 66 becomes 68. There's probably going to be a tiering in there. But if you raise that full retirement age from 67 to 69, and then add some indexing for longevity, the gap is cut by 38%. And so really, there's a couple other simple layers. If you move from a CPIW, the cost of living adjustment is based on currently CPIW. If you change it instead to chained CPI, then experts believe that is actually the CPIW overinflates the benefit adjustment that retirees need. If you change it to a more accurate level of inflation, then that would reduce the gap by 18%. If you means tested, this is not necessarily one of the more popular options, but if you means tested and said, hey, if you've got $10 million in savings, you need less Social Security. And so you reduce the benefit for the top 1% of income generators based on your current income. That reduces the gap by 17%. And so again, there's ways that you can do this. So let's look at maybe a couple of those situations where we can mix and match.
So here the fun begins. It's like the Chex Mix at the holiday parties. We get to put some different things together, see how they taste, and get that flavor exactly right. So maybe it's palatable enough for the American public to say, yes, we will move forward with reform. So what's the first option that we're going to look at here?
All right, so the first option is you spread the load. So you increase the payroll tax by 1%. Not a big increase. So half a percent's going to employer, half percent's going to employee. There's some pain, but it's not tremendous. You change the COLA from CPI W to change CPI. Boom, that's it. You've done it.
And really, at the end of the day, this is just the idea that if chicken prices increase in a huge way, that people might go over and buy beef, or vice versa. If there's one cereal that skyrockets because oats are priced exorbitantly, that they'll go over and they'll buy, cornflakes, or whatever. There is a versatility, there's an adaptability of the consumer, as opposed to it's just going to be this calculation that only looks at a certain basket, regardless of what that basket might be substituted for.
Right. And the one other piece that I forgot to mention is you have to subject all wages to payroll tax.
Right.
So the wealthiest earners have more that they're putting in. But if you do those three, increase the payroll tax by 1%, change CPI, subject all payroll to payroll tax, then Adam in our conversation earlier, he has an additional $500 a year, $60 a month that goes to Social Security. Does it hurt? Yes. It still reduces his disposable income. Employers still have to pay more. But at the end of the day, Social Security it can be sustainable for the next 75 years.
So let's just say, though, that we didn't really like that idea for one reason or another. We want to get rid of that sequence. What's another option that we could look at?
Yeah. So second one, you just make current wage earners bear the burden, especially the rich. So this is our situation where we increase payroll tax by 1.5%. We don't eliminate that base, but we allow for that base between base and 400,000. So there's a little bit of gap where you can still earn higher wages, but they're not taxed. But then once you hit $400,000, then you have wages included again, and you've got that fourth bend point that's added.
Okay.
So if you do that, then Adam now has to pay $750 more per year than he currently does. The wealthiest of Americans have more taxes imposed on their earnings. Corporations have to pay more in terms of their portion of FICA. But Social Security is, again, solvent in 75 years. You put the payroll tax up to 2% in that situation, and Social Security solvent beyond 75 years.
So 1.5% increase in payroll tax, especially if we add it to those who make north of $400,000, we add that fourth bend point, and voila, we're there. Again, not anything that is exciting, and everybody bears some amount of burden who is in the workforce. Doesn't require anything of our retirees in that one, so we're not even looking at CPIW versus change CPI. But that's another way.
That's another way.
Okay, so let's just say, gosh, we disliked number one. We hated number two. Is there a third option?
Yes. So Spencer, there is a third option. If you have current wages that are high, let's leave those alone. So let's figure out how to do that. So unless you're receiving benefits, then there's going to be a reduction in benefits. So this is the means testing option. So we're going to increase the payroll tax by 1%. There's really no way around it. You have to do this. It's the one lever that is really going to affect the most amount of change. So we cannot not address the payroll tax. But we're not going to tax the wealthiest of Americans any more than we do. You're going to index COLAs to change CPI and means test the benefit for the top 1% of earners. And then you got to increase the full retirement age and index it for longevity. So as you can see, there's more that you have to do here. But again, we think that a lot of times people are malleable. When you see chicken prices increase, you're going to adjust. So the change CPI, it does help. If you have income earners that are in the top 1% of brackets, you just means test it. You might have your benefits reduced. Again, there is going to be pain, but when you retire, let's say you are 75 and you just have loved your job. And so you're receiving Social Security income, that gets means tested, but then you decide, okay, I'm ready to hang up the spikes. Once you do that, then your income is not means tested anymore because you don't have that same level of income. And so your benefit then increases after that. And so it's only while you're working and while you're generating that substantial income, again, in that top 1%. And so we're really only increasing the benefit pain to some of those wealthiest of earners.
And when you think about all of this together, each one of these different areas, you talked about the adaptability. It's interesting because we're living longer than we have in the past, and yet we didn't increase that full retirement age at the pace that we really needed to. And so that's one of those levers that seems like it's one that you've just got to put in place. Yeah. Just go ahead and set expectations that we're moving from 66 or 67 to 68 to 69 along some kind of graded path. Yeah. We think about other pieces in here. I mean, the chain CPI move also seems like one of those things that you just say, well, again, we've got to be adaptable in this. We have spent and we've set expectations that are really not sustainable, but they're not, it's not as though people can't make a change to their purchasing patterns when they need to, if something becomes really, really expensive, which is just the assumption that you're going to do in this kind of new setup here. So there's so many different levers that it's interesting to see that we can pull. The one that we didn't talk about here, because we're fiscally prudent on this podcast, but the one that we didn't talk about here is one where they don't even address all of it, but they do something, and so we say, well, maybe it's not going to run out in 2033, but maybe we can just push this out to like 2053 or something like that, where we increase the payroll tax a little bit, we push out that full retirement age, we change up the CPI calculation, we do enough that we get voters off of our backs, and we put this off to the next generation. So if I had to guess what will happen, I think something like that will happen. I don't think that we'll fully solve the problem, but we've given you a number of different ways that you can think about it today of fully solving the problem and even fully solving it beyond 75 years. But my guess is that's not going to be politically tenable once we get to actually seeing how the changes are made.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Spencer, for talking us through that last situation. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you have questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care. If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend, and if you have questions, go to our website at SeriousRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SeriousRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.